So good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 3 of hashtag SafeCon 2020, Save Against Fear 2020 in the year of our confusion and so many things. So welcome to Accessibility in Gaming, a panel where we are going to be discussing a wide array of topics about all manner of accessibility. And of course, we always love, audience questions, audience participation as we kind of go through, discussing the different areas of inaccessibility and how that one impacts gaming, because we do know as a truth, everyone plays. It's no secret that play is not only central to us as human beings for our social connectivity and, just general mental health, but play is actually something that science has discovered is central to pretty much all sentient life. One of my favorite videos that I've seen is it's a crane that finds a golf ball, and this crane just has the greatest time just bouncing this golf ball off of a concrete walkway, flies up, and just the excited wing flap of this crane as it's playing with this ball. And then my dog playing with a squirrel, legit playing, not like, man, I'm gonna get you, but so play is something that even for the very formative years, it is very central. So we want to make sure that everyone can play. And there are sometimes challenges that people may have to accessing play. And as an industry that is so central to recreation and mental health, we want to talk about what are some of the things that we've seen in the industry that are helping to make gaming more accessible. Where could we go in the future? But before we dive into all of that wonderfully incredible content, I'm going to go ahead and call on all of my wonderful panelists to introduce themselves. So I'm going to start kind of in my left to right, top to bottom. Stanford, would you like to let the folks out there know who you are?
Sure. My name is Matthew Stanford, although there are a lot of Matthews in our industry, so I tend to just go by Stanford. A couple famous ones. And I am one of the co-owners and the lead designer for Legendary Pants. Mostly we sell dice, but we have a couple of smaller development products and projects in as well. I've been in the industry for a couple of years, and I feel very small beans to all of these wonderful people that are with me. So.
Well, definitely it also is worth mention. Thank you, Stanford and Legendary Pants. You have been the co-sponsor of Save Against Fear now. I believe this is the 3rd year running, if I am correct. And so thank you for your continued support of us, and also for the donation of Ordinary Towns to every badge holder at this year's Save Against Fear. So thank you for being a part of this. You also ran some panel content last year, so I think it's going to be awesome. All right.
Okay.
Eddie, do you want to introduce next?
Sure. My name is Eddie Webb. I am a freelance writer and game designer. I've been working in the industry for years. I am right now currently, one of the things I do is in-house developer at Onyx Path Publishing, which means that I work full-time to manage and help direct not only making games, but also helping other developers with their own game designs. And also I'm on here because I have hearing loss. I have a bone anchored hearing aid. And so it's something the past few years I've been really digging into more about how to increase accessibility in games.
Fantastic. Cynthia, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself next?
Sure. I'm Cynthia Celeste Miller. I've been in the industry for about as long as Eddie, which is years.
Right. Something in my throat. I'm sorry.
Exactly right. And I am the president and owner of Spectrum Games. I've done such things as Cartoon Action Hour, Slasher Flick, Urban Manhunt on the, I could go on, but I'll just leave it at that. I've worked a lot of freelance stuff as well, including stuff for Onyx Path and Comic Images and so forth and so on. And I'm really glad to be here.
All right. And Dixie, would you like to let the folks know who you are?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Dixie Cochran. I'm also an in-house developer at Onyx Path Publishing. Eddie and I handle different branches of that, along with our peer Matthew Dawkins, another Matthew in the industry. We definitely have a too many Matts problem at Onyx Path, also a too many Mikes problem.
Yes.
So we're not going to hire any more ever. Sorry. No, joking.
The mic
no more M's. No more M's. Too many M's.
Yeah. So I do that as my day job. I also freelance both for Onyx Path. It's kind of weird. I do it in my free time and in my main time. But also for a few other companies in the industry. Most recently, I've worked on Cyberpunk Red. I've done some work with Fantasy Flight. I did Heartland Bound Second Edition. Done a few things there. I am not physically disabled. I am neuroatypical. I have ADHD with comorbid various mental health issues. But I care a lot about making my games accessible for other people. And so that's kind of why I'm here, is because I want to make, like, I care about accessibility in video games a lot for me, and I care about it for other people, and I care about it in RPGs. And so I just wanted to kind of talk about it. And I'll probably learn more from these lovely people than have my own points to make, but I'm super excited to be here.
Oh, no problem. And thank you for actually kind of setting up one of the first questions, which is, I mean, I guess to get kind of a baseline when we talk about accessibility. Okay, that's a pretty wide open term, right? Because, you know, we've already referenced a couple of things where accessibility, most people, when they think of accessibility, they immediately think of a physical component to accessibility. They think, you know, maybe someone can't get there just through like physical mobility challenges. But, you know, as we've talked, there's also consideration about accessibility in terms of mental health. You know, you discussed, you know, neurodiversity versus, you know, neurotypical. And, you know, we also have mental health concerns, you know, where we have games, you know, talking about Vampire and other games that may have a more mature flair to their content. Now we are maybe talking also about accessibility for people maybe with a trauma background or, you know, a history of a very sensitive life experience, not to mention the other thing in the room where folks don't typically also think about cultural accessibility. You know, it's, I mean, we had a wonderful cultural representation panel. And then we also, I know, touched on this a lot in the 2020, a game-changing year panel about cultural sensitivity and accessibility with, you know, representation and how, you know, this hobby has been, you know, the territory of white neckbeard for so many years, because those are the games were written from that perspective. So what challenges do you think as designers and also gamers for years, like what challenges do you see in games? And when we're talking about games, we try to focus a little on analog. So we're kind of talking like tabletop RPG as well as board games. Because as we're going to talk, there's a lot of that's being done out there. But what do you think as panelists and, you know, folks in the industry, what are some of the areas that we're lacking?
I have to say, for me, just as somebody who grew up playing games in the 90s and then played them, you know, from there on out, like, I think just one of the smallest, easiest things to do is put people in your books that look like the world. Because I think people not seeing themselves in games is a huge barrier to people wanting to play those games. For years when I was a kid, like all the women were scantily clad with giant breasts and all the men were badass warriors. And I never saw, like, honestly, part of the reason I got into Vampire is because the first time I opened Vampire, I was like, oh, that looks like my friends. Like, they're all wearing like ripped shirts and like leather jackets and they're weirdos. And like, okay, cool. Like, it's a game for me. It's not a game for me if I were a foot taller, you know, and wearing way less clothing than I have to wear. So yeah, like, I mean, that's gotten better over the years. Obviously, there are tons of games that are geared towards that. I mentioned Harlem Unbound, things like Swordsfall. There are games that represent a lot of different cultures and different body types. And that's a fairly recent change. Like, I mean, Eddie very passionately put a wheelchair user as one of the main characters in Dystopia Rising. And there are tons of people who are like, what? A post-apocalyptic game with somebody in a wheelchair? And it's like, yeah, those people still exist after the apocalypse. Like, they don't just cease to exist.
Yeah. It's other thoughts on other areas that we're possibly missing out on?
It's hard to say because I think there's been so much conversation so quickly in the past couple of years about accessibility that it can become overwhelming. There's so much, I don't want to say sudden passion, but visible passion about being more inclusive and accessible in games, that a lot of areas that even 2 years ago, if I'd been on a panel like this, I'd be like, oh, well, that's been covered. there are some great resources like ASL for RPG, which is a resource specifically dedicated to coming up with American Sign Language signs and resources and techniques to allow for deaf people to be able to participate and use, as opposed to having to spell out things like AC and DC, you know, blah, blah. And you know, Dot's RPG project, which allows blind people to you know, dice that have Braille on them so that people can read dice and identify. Even in the video game space, the Game Accessibility Guidelines website is a great resource about compiling things you need to think about if you're developing a video game, and a lot of those pair well with making board games and tabletop role-playing games. So there's a lot out there, but I think we're starting to hit the stage of seeing, okay, how much of this is actually working? And we start hitting nuance a bit more because like I said, the easiest thing is putting people in your book, but now we're starting to have conversations about like, okay, but having all the dark-skinned people being evil characters is a problem. That's a nuance to it that we need to resolve. You know, having an entire, you know, the whole conversation around race that's happening in the D&D sphere. We're getting definitely a lot of, okay, now how can we do this better? So I don't think there are so many gaps necessarily so much as now we're at the stage of how can we be more inclusive, be more effective, be more respectful as we continue to grow into this space.
And I think we're seeing a lot more of this brought out in the game books themselves, not just with representation in terms of character, but actually addressing these things in text and oftentimes mechanically where necessary. I think the D&D orc situation is going to be possibly the big game changer, the thing that's, because it's caused a huge thing in the game world.
Well, even, I mean, talking about things, one of the other things that I had read about recently, and I was seeing that there's still a fair amount of chatter on, was in one of the, I believe it was a 5e resource or something online, they actually designed effectively like a wheelchair, but it was armored, and it really saddened me how up in arms people were and how they were like, you can't have a wheelchair in a dungeon. And I'm like, hold on. Are you playing with the same like 5-foot grid that I am? Because, you know, unless this is like a Ben-Hur chariot situation where like it's humongo, why can't that be there? And do you know what I mean? That amount of outrage just seemed very, very unnecessary. Matt, you look like you're ready to.
Yeah,
go ahead, Stanford.
Speaking as the resident wheelchair user, the outcry on that really kind of it is painful in a way that is almost indescribable, because you're talking about an RPG where, you know, fireballs are thrown from staves and dragons and flying angels and all kinds of stuff are just happening constantly. But as soon as someone at a table just wants to use a wheelchair, it becomes a problem. And that's such a targeted discrimination that it's you know, I deal with what I deal with in the community all the time, but that right there is such a slap in the face that it's really it's just insulting, frankly.
Yeah.
That sounds exactly like how I react when people were like, well, in Game of Thrones, women can't be in charge because it's you know, based on history. And I'm like, there's dragons. There's dragons, and like a woman being in a position of power is too much for you. And like that's the same kind of disbelief I had when people were getting mad about the fantasy wheelchairs. Right. It's like, what? How is this crossing the line?
I will say that some of this is coming from a place of people who have never experienced this before, in the sense of they haven't seen disabled people in their fiction. And so it's like, okay, so I can't do this because I've never seen it before, and that's why I can't do it. I remember having this exact conversation in depth in Dixie mentioned Dystopia Rising. That's a post-apocalyptic game, and it's set several generations after the fall of humanity. And one of the things I told to both my team and to a lot of people initially when we were pitching it to potential buyers is that in a post-apocalyptic scenario, the typical arc of a movie or a TV show is that people become steadily more disabled throughout the story. So the argument that disabled people would die in a post-apocalyptic scenario is completely inaccurate. It's the reverse. People become more disabled as a result of that scenario. And so putting them front and center and allowing people to play through either the struggle of disability or to ignore that and say that, after several generations from now, they will have adapted and figured out, new accessibility aids and mobility aids and the like, because we're smart people and we figure shit out. And so that's one of the things that I was like, this is going to be, a lot of my games I try to talk about disability, but that was one game where it's like, this is going to be front and center. If you aren't okay with having disabled people in this post-apocalyptic game, I genuinely don't know what you're looking at, what kind of genre you're talking about.
Yeah.
And just by addressing people and saying, look at your fiction again, and really think about what you're looking at. I had a lot of people go, light bulb go, oh, right. No, now that you mentioned that, I do see, people losing their hands in Walking Dead, or, people wearing eye patches, and they hadn't connected that to what society tells them is disabled people.
Yeah, it was like, oh, they have a serious injury, not like,
Right.
oh, they are now a disabled person. And It's like, no, that's what happens.
Okay.
Okay, just so everybody knows, we can keep talking, but there are 2 people with their hands raised in the chat.
Oh,
We don't want to go so far past their questions that we don't get to answer them.
oh no, not a problem. Mariah, you have your hand raised?
I do have my hand raised. I really love where this conversation is going, and it seemed to start with talking about what to include in games as far as accessibility, but I like how you're now transitioning into it's great to put this stuff in books, and yes, it should be there to represent, but you're really getting close to that. How do we get the community to accept those people in the books, and to accept those representations at their table? Because yes, I like to give people the benefit of the doubt that maybe they don't know what to do, how to respond, how to react. And in just to put it out there, Matthew is my husband. So yes, he can roll up in a wheelchair and everybody is going to see that and be uncomfortable. But then, Dixie, you talked about, being in your situation, no one's going to see that. No one's going to see. So you're going to sit at the table and everything's going to be fun. And eventually they're going to figure out that maybe there's something different about you and not know what to, so how can we get people to be accepting of everyone at their table?
I think the more people are exposed to it, the more normalized it'll be. And I've been trying to do that a lot with the characters in Urban Manhunt, the iconic hunters. We have a trans woman in the initial book. We have someone who's deaf in the second book. We're trying to to normalize it to where it's not even a conversation to itself. And I want to get to the point to where it's not an issue. There's no, why is this character in here, or this type of character in there? It should just be, here are a bunch of characters, disabilities or what have you. It doesn't matter. They're characters.
Yeah, I mean, looking at it from even just a psychology standpoint, because a lot of what I do as a mental health worker, there is a lot to be said from our perspective is very much kind of guided by our experience. People say, well, why can't the rich just understand the poor? Well, because they live the life of the rich. The concept of a $20 bill to these folks is a completely alien concept. And I know that sounds like a glib example of that, but if you've dealt with a life of privilege, if you've dealt with a life where your every need is kind of addressed, then those folks, even if you are a person who has disability or some of the, maybe you're used to a life where people have accommodated for you. So you've never understood struggle, even through the perspective of being a person who may struggle. So part of it is, I'll give a short example. Save Against Fear has been running miniatures games for years. And the first year that we had Warhammer, we didn't actively say, okay, do we have anybody who plays Warhammer that is in a wheelchair or disabled? We didn't. We just said we might have someone who is in a wheelchair who's playing Warhammer. So why don't we make sure that our play space has more than enough open space so people can get around? And I mean, talking about just the simplicity of the con environment, that's one thing that a lot of people have remarked to us and go, man, you really space out, so it is comfortable for people to get around. And that was by intention. And when folks notice that, it's interesting to see how many folks man, you could get a lot more people in here if you would blah, blah, blah. And I go, no, we're okay. We've intentionally designed our environment so people who have accessibility issues can be more comfortably navigating the con. Because I've been to Gen Con, and this is no slam on most cons, but they're like butts and seats, butts and seats. And I'm like, yeah, but what about the butts in the aisles? Because, or butts in their own seats that go with them. That's just, all attendees are equally important. So I think the more that we, like we said, the more that presentation and the more the environment is staged for those conversations, the more people go, oh, maybe I should think about that if I'm a local game store owner. Because what if my store is designed without accessibility in mind? You're unintentionally blocking someone out. And I get the financial concern, but do you know what I mean? I mean, just as a weird kind of segue, we've started conversations just with that initial thought. And if more people would think about that, it would become more ever present, I think.
Yeah. I think that also, by the way, for Save Against Fear, thank you as an anxious person for having more space. Because I like that I can walk into a corner at Save Against Fear and be alone for 5 minutes, which I can't do at any other con unless I go to the bathroom. So like, yeah, no, for me, just to answer your question, I'm very open about my mental health issues. Like I am I talk about them on my Facebook. I talk about them on our podcast. I talk about them on Twitter. I have made new friends and within 5 minutes been like, oh, I have anxiety. Don't worry about me. Just because like, I'd rather just get it out there and kind of say like, hey, if I ever do a weird thing, there are some reasons. Sometimes it's just because I'm weird. But sometimes it's because like I have mental health issues and I might need to like go take a minute, or I might have to duck out on plans at the last minute because I just can't do it right now, or what have you. I might have to go take a Klonopin. Like there's all kinds of things that could happen. I'm mostly fine because I'm very extroverted. I don't have social anxiety, but I'm one of those people who I can sit here and stare at a project for 3 days and just not start it. I have major executive dysfunction issues that I still deal with all the time. And that's one of those things that my friends have luckily been very understanding about, but I do have to make them aware of it. Like my boss has been understanding about it. Eddie's understanding about it in the past when I've been like, I couldn't start this project for you until yesterday. I'm so sorry. It's not going to be as good as it should be. Well, but if you tell people and you get it out there, that's better than just being like, oh, I'm a fuck up, which is what I thought for the first 30 years of my life, honestly. Like I didn't get diagnosed until I was an adult.
Real quick question, Dixie, if you don't mind, and then I'm going to I want to make sure, Matt, you were ready to zing in, I think, earlier. Yeah, right. Executive functioning. Does that impact your experience of playing in a game, whether it's, like say like making decisions in a board game, or like is that like, just to talk about some of the potential impact of some of what the panel experiences, is that something that like, are there certain games that you find easier to play than others?
I would say that yes. So I have, for me, it's more the anxiety that actually gets me than anything else when it comes to gaming. And that's because if too many decisions are left up to me, instead of like the storyteller or GM telling me something, then I get very like twisted very quickly. Like I can get very anxious to almost the point of tears if someone's like, well, what do you find there? And I'm like, I don't know, I'm going to say the wrong thing and you're all going to think I'm stupid and I'm going to go crawl in a hole now. As opposed to like them just telling me that. Now, once again, like I was on stream the other day and that exact thing happened. And I said, I am not great at this kind of improv, but I have anxiety. Can you just tell me what I find? And the storyteller was like, oh, sure. And just made something up. Nice. Because I was open about it as opposed to letting myself get worked up, which I used to do in the past. So that's the biggest thing that impacts me, I'd say, for gaming with my cocktail of brain weirds, is that like, I definitely, if I get put on the spot in a way that I am uncomfortable with, I go from like 0 to 60 real quick when it comes to anxiety. Like I can be having a great time and then suddenly I'm like, I'm going to cry and leave. So having to get past that and be open about that has been probably my biggest struggle.
And I think that going back to one of the leitmotifs, I guess, that we have before I call back on you, Matt, and then we have one more raised hand. That's part of just that kind of speaks with, if we have more, it's this weird helix, right? If we have more accepting tables that are able and knowledgeable to have those conversations, players feel more comfortable communicating the challenges they have because they know that it will be heard. They know that it will be respected. So it's this helping each other out, because I've heard just as many people go, well, if you just tell me, and it's like, well, but it's kind of, sometimes it might be difficult to communicate, hey, I'm having an issue with this, especially if you're at a table at a con game with a bunch of strangers. You don't know these people, and if you don't feel that you'll be heard, everybody's, oh my God, dragging the game down or whatever. It's about creating that environment where it's okay, and that's in almost, I think, every sense of accessibility, whether it's cultural, whether it's identity, mental health, physical, or whatever it might be. So I think that definitely speaks to something that we need to work on. Matt or Stanford, I got to keep, I'm so used to calling you Matthew. Stanford, what were you about to offer to the?
Well, I was kind of gonna bring up the because you were talking about the accessibility of conventions as far as things like wheelchair accessibility and how crowded everything is. And I definitely do appreciate Dixie's perspective there, because it is nice to find a quiet moment at a con, which is more and more impossible. And I'm from the Philadelphia area, so our local gaming convention anymore is PAX Unplugged, and I know 2020 is not the best example of this kind of thing, but the gaming sphere has become more and more publicly social, where we're all going to conventions, we're all going to stores, we're all going to these things where it used to be we all kind of hid in our parents' basement and fretted about high school. Now that we're out in the public space, in some ways it is more accessible, but in other ways it's almost less accessible, because especially Philadelphia being an older city, 90% of the game stores around me I can't even get into. And it's not their fault per se, but it's rough. It is a rough environment. So it's kind of nice when we go to a place, of course we're going to talk up our own, the con that we actually like, but it's nice when I go to a place like SEF and I can actually get to every table in the convention, because when I go to PAX Unplugged, I can get to some of the outskirts tables, but as soon as I'm one layer deep, there's just no room, and there's no room to get around at all. And that convention center is huge.
Yeah.
Origins is the same way. So it's just it is an interesting environment to live in, a time where everything is so much more public, and yet it's still got some of those barriers that I've been dealing with all the time.
And Matthew,
I also
I'll
see a
say
lot
real
of
quick.
Sorry, go ahead.
That Matthew, you can get to SAF by yourself. Sorry, as his caregiver as well. You can get to SAF by yourself.
Yes.
He cannot go to PAX by himself. He cannot go into Philadelphia by himself. He can't go to Origins by himself. So
yeah,
that's like, for someone with especially a physical disability, and this can also be the case with someone with anxiety, like you can't go to a place like Philadelphia by yourself, because that is it's just too stressful. He literally cannot go somewhere by himself.
I also see a lot of vendors using the standing height tables for people that stand. And so there's probably a lot of demos that just aren't even accessible to anybody who is not able to do that, whether you're in a wheelchair or whether you just can't stand for long periods.
Right.
There are lots of people that just can't do that. And like, or if you're just, if you're a little person, like there's all kinds of reasons that you could not be like have this be accessible. I've seen people with tables that are almost too tall for me at 5 feet, where like it's like up to here on me. Right. And I'm like, well, I look silly. These are definitely for 6 foot tall people. So yeah, like that's one thing that Onyx Path, we try to keep all of our stuff at like normal table height, so you can.
Right. And it's nice, and kind of speaking to Jack's point about, well, we don't know if we're going to have a wheelchair Warhammer player, so why don't we just make sure we're accessible? The attitude that's thrown at, people especially in my situation, but I'm sure, other people with other kinds of disabilities experience the same thing. It's, well, you just had to ask. If you ask, we'll do whatever you want. Well, that's not helpful. Okay, that's not great, because frankly, I'm not going to ask. It's not only the stress of it. I just don't feel like bothering people, and I don't like being a spectacle. So I'm not going to ask. I'll just go away. I'll just go find something else to do.
Yeah, because and it's not intended, but what it comes across is basically you have to ask permission to exist in this space, and you know what? Fuck you.
All right. I did want to make sure we have my good buddy John from RPG Research. John, you have your hand raised. Is your question still on deck here? Thanks for being patient.
Wasn't aware I had my hand raised, but
The other John.
The other John.
Oh wait, I'm
Oh.
sorry. Wait, where am
John S.
It's
John S.
John S.
we have
not
two.
John
we have
John.
two Johns. Oh my goodness, I'm horrible as a moderator. This is just ridiculous.
It's okay, Jack. You're horrible at lots of things.
Oh,
Oh,
he's not wrong. He's not wrong.
but we love you anyway.
We do love
Thank
you.
you. Thank you. But John S. Go ahead. You were on the air.
I am so sorry. I did not realize my hand was raised.
Oh,
I'm enjoying this panel, but I have no questions at this time. Sorry.
Fair enough.
okay.
Then we don't feel bad for talking past you for the past 20 minutes.
That's fine. You guys, it's great conversation. Really enjoying it. Sorry.
Oh,
No,
no.
Good.
Thank you. That keeping us going. Loving it.
You guys are doing a great job. I'm going to say one more thing. I'm so sorry.
No,
you guys
not at
are
all.
so fantastic.
No, go for it.
But Dixie, you were bringing up a really great point in the conventions as well about the higher tables, and there are just so many things. And again, this is where I'm like, I like to educate people and help people to know what can you do when you're faced with a person with some sort of disability, whether or not you know it. But in these conventions as well, Dixie, not only are these tables too high, and this happens at conventions, at restaurants, at the grocery store, people will not look at Matthew and talk to him. They will talk to me. So
I've had
Thank
that
you.
happen
Go
when
ahead,
I was
Eddie.
hanging out with. I have a good friend who's in a wheelchair, and I've had that happen with her before. We're walking around a con together. Well, she's scooting, I'm walking, and people will talk to me, and she is way more famous than I am in geeky spaces, and they won't realize who she is sometimes even because they don't realize she's a wheelchair user. And also, let's talk about the time at Emerald City Comic Con one time that her scooter ran out of power in the middle of Seattle because that was a fun push. but I mean, there was no place for her to charge it in one of the event spaces, and that was also a problem.
Oh,
Like she needed to charge it and she couldn't, and by the time we left it back at the
Wow.
hotel, it was out of juice, and so we walked her back.
Well, and I think we're going to kind of move into talking about some examples of how we've seen modifications and how we've seen some inclusions of accessibility. I know one big major move, and again, as a convention operator, one of the things that it kind of behooves us is over time, even though we provide for that wide array of space, and Dixie, you're saying about, what, I can go and have a mow in like a quiet corner of the con because there's just like tons of spaces built in. It still, we're like, okay, Save is obviously going to at some point outgrow the space that we've been using. So now where we switch venues, there are a list of not only current considerations, but there's also a list of, AFK rooms, immensely popular at conventions, specifically rooms designed, and it's like, okay, we're a small con, but we still have to be very conscientious of the fact that that is now turning in to if you are running a responsible convention to your attendees, that's something you got to include. And there's a lot of rules and there's a lot of considerations for that. And folks are like, well, we can't afford that. Well, maybe you have to be very conscientious and cautious about your environment because it's for everyone's accessibility. So I think that it also, there is a part, if you are going to serve population, like one of the trainings that Bodana does pro bono is, we call it ASD or FLGS. And it's autism spectrum disorders at your friendly local game store. And our whole point in offering this, and therapists are like, hey, can I get that to run that for my company? Yeah, here, have it, take it. Yes, we want information to get out there. And part of that is to help game owners be aware of, what's my lighting like? What's this? What do I have, carpeted floors or hardwood floors? And that can impact anything from the noise level to the accessibility of someone with with mobility issue. Like, there are so many. Is your game store right next to the train tracks? Well, maybe you can't change that, but maybe it's something you want to make your patrons aware of, especially if someone who is coming to your store has a noise sensitivity issue as a part of their neural makeup. So in the light of this, and with people needing to kind of keep themselves, I think it's a responsibility on the part of anyone who is offering services to an audience. Stay informed, research, look up trends. But there are some things that we've seen. I'm going to just point out a couple of examples. Magic Maze, one of my favorite board games. So it's a very fast-paced game. Parents love it because you have to be quiet when you play it. It's a non-verbal communication team builder. But one of the things that they built in is that they built in color blindness accessibility to the pieces. And that's another thing that I know I've seen with a lot of the board games in the Bodhana library. Oh, wow, that's awesome. Like, you not only have, like, in Azul, you have colors, but there are patterns. So even if you can't distinguish the colors, there's still, accessibility. Nyctophobia, which is a great horror-themed board game that was designed for the designer designed it with her uncle in mind, who's blind. And the whole idea is you play the game with a set of blinder sunglasses on where you can't see anything, and you have to feel where the vampires are and feel where the forest is. And you have to feel like where the civilians are, and you have to move them and guide them back to the vehicle to rescue them. It's a fascinating game that literally is designed, and we've actually used it for like Cub Scout troops. When we actually teach about accessibility and disability, we actually say, okay, now I want you guys to at least get some idea here of the experience of not having sight to guide you through this game. So even some of these games that were designed. So I just wanted to ask, what are some of your favorite examples of how people have made gaming more accessible? Like where are we doing good? Or doing better, I should say.
So some of my examples are going to be in the video game space, just because that's where a lot of my initial consulting kind of has been taking place. But one really fantastic example is the latest Assassin's Creed game. Assassin's Creed is a franchise that's been pretty good about providing subtitles for all their games. But for their latest game, they did something different, is that usually subtitles are turned off. And you have to go into the accessibility menu to turn them back on. And their demographics showed that 50% of players will go through and turn them back on.
Subtitles, and I am hearing person.
Right, yeah. And that's the thing, is that subtitles are useful for a lot of reasons besides focus hearing impairment or deaf people. So the next game, they actually started with subtitles on and had an option to turn them off. And only 10% of people turned them off.
Wow.
Yeah, I know, I didn't. But I also and that's the kind of thing where I didn't notice when I was playing. They were just on, and I was like, oh, that's how I play. Okay. And didn't even think about the fact that that was the first time that it really happened.
Right, yeah. And things like they put a shaded background behind the subtitles you turn on and off, which is really, really helpful to be able to read them. They changed the length of the subtitles, so you don't have 5 million words in 2-point font crammed on the screen. Looking at you, Three Houses.
Looking at you, Mass Effect Andromeda. Smallest freaking subtitles I've ever seen in my entire life.
Right.
Shade thrown.
So I mean, and that's something that I've gone to shows to talk to people about, is that these tools already exist. Just turn them on. Don't because right now I have been trained, and people watch my Twitch stream, maybe see me do this. It's like, as soon as I boot up a game, my first thing I do is I go to the options menu. I have to dig through all that and set everything appropriately before I can even start playing. So if I can just push play and that's all set for me, that's like, oh, wow, that's cool. And it's a little thing, but it made me feel really seen. Like, oh, you are recognizing that this is a thing that I would like to have. And I don't feel like I have to play the game atypically to be able to get there. There's another game which I have completely blanked on the name. I'll have to dig it up as we're talking, but it's a game about sign language where you actually invent a sign language.
Signs?
I think
it's actually Signs is a great example. It's actually based on a real world situation where there is no national Venezuelan sign language, and it's from the same company that made Dialect, which is another language based game.
I love Dialect.
Oh, they're a phenomenal company. And the whole idea is that you basically go through live plays where you're in class and recess and class and recess, and it's a nonverbal game. And you have to do things like tell people your name, and you have like something about you, but you literally make up your own sign language that is unique to your experience. And And again, one of the things that, Badana loves about a lot of these experiences, we're actually talking with the designers who we were close to getting them, to come and be involved with Save this year. We actually are using game experiences like that as trainings, not only for the community, but also for, professionals who maybe work with, maybe the person that you're supporting is not quote unquote deaf or hearing impaired, but what if you're working with a client who is non-traditionally communicative? Maybe it is someone who is on the spectrum or has a profound disability that impairs their ability to communicate in traditional ways. This is a tremendous empathy perspective taking exercise that now a game can teach someone how difficult it is, but it's in, trainings talking about, well, this. Yeah, it's great to get knowledge, but when you get that experience is where I think people really feel what's going on, that they could utilize that in a different fashion. So yes, sign is an absolutely incredible. Do you mind for 1 second if I call on a hand raised, Eddie?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. John, go ahead. You are on the air.
All right. I was going to say earlier about conventions, and RPG Research has done for some conventions like SpoCon audits, where we literally go in, measure the spaces, look for pinch points, see what the carpets are like, what the tables are, whether or not we can switch tables. Because when I run a game room, I have multiple level tables, and I may have to switch a table by whoever's showing up to get them at the appropriate table. We have standing tables as well as low sitting tables. We were talking also about accommodations and the cost. The biggest cost I found for accommodation is sign language translators. They, for example, with SpoCon, 2 sign language translators, because you have to give them breaks and all that stuff, will cost more than the entire budget of the convention.
Sounds about right.
So just, you have to literally double the budget of SpoCon in order to have a sign language translators there. Examples of games that use sign language. Moss for a VR game where you have a mouse that will only talk back to the player in sign language.
Yes.
Tabletop games for sign language. Inspire Isles, where you are supposedly going to learn British Sign Language during gameplay because it's used as a somatic component for casting spells. They also have American Sign Language as one of their goals, and we're going to be getting that one. The latest one, though, is Planet Bound, which doesn't use sign language in the game, but they are producing a translation of the book, of the rule books, in sign language.
That's wonderful.
So you have a written book, you can have an audio, but they're also going to produce the entire book in sign language. So you have to watch the video to see how to play the game, as somebody explains to you in your native language.
Yeah,
Cool.
just as a mention, John, because I'm never shy about mentioning, our colleagues and partners. John represents RPG Research, which is a wonderful company in Spokane, Washington. And how long? Because you all have, do research and similar work, but you actually have a lot more targeted work towards with accessibility in mind, correct? Just to kind of give yourself a little plug, because I love you and Hawk and all the fine work that you all do.
Yeah, we are a 501c3 researching the effects of all formats of role-playing games, from live action to computer to audiobooks, etc., and looking at their benefits for use with education, therapy, professional development, and just for plain entertainment. We do look at things like using role-playing games for brain injury recovery and using computer brain interface. We're trying to write a computer game right now that you will be able to play entirely as a role-playing game with CBI, computer brain interface.
Yeah.
Cool.
We do specialize in autism and things like that, and we are big advocates for accessibility. We teach entire classes on tools you can use for like people with different grip strengths, for sign language, Braille dice. Dots RPG Project produces
Yeah,
the
we
Braille
mentioned that
dice.
earlier. It's pretty
Yep.
cool.
Yeah, what I would say, John, is go ahead and feel free to drop a link to RPG Research in the chat so folks can find you and all the great stuff you do. And
Yes, please.
yeah, thank you.
You mentioned Planet Bound, and that was actually a controversy over the past month. I don't know if anybody else followed that.
Ooh,
But
what-
originally on their Kickstarter page, the ASL stretch, it was a stretch goal. It was a $17,000 stretch goal to produce it in ASL. It wasn't going to be the default. And there was such a huge backlash to that because they didn't hit that goal. I think they made around 5 or 6K. That they said, no, we were going to do it anyway. We're sorry. But there's a minute where like they did like all this advertising of like, you know, ASL game, ASL friendly game. And then there was like, why is it a stretch goal if you're going to talk about it? And
Right.
yeah, it was like a whole thing. I'm pretty sure what resolved was that they kind of said like, no, we were intending to do it no matter what. We were just trying to get money for extra production, essentially. But there was a big like Twitter, you know, it was just like one day of the Twitter RPG discourse was like why is that not the default if you're so excited about it?
Yeah.
He was on my talk show, which I do on Thursdays, and he was explaining to us that his intent is to, if this doesn't fund it through the current Kickstarter, he will do other fundraising to produce it. He's going to produce it no matter,
Right.
but it is going to take a lot of extra money to do it, more than it takes to produce the game itself.
Yeah, which is like what you were saying about conventions and how like an interpreter will, you know, double your budget. Like the only con I see interpreters at on a regular basis that I go to is Dragon Con, and that's only by request for certain panels. Like they're not at every panel, but people can request them and they will, you know, do their level best to provide one. But I also know that they don't have like 30 on retainer, so I have no idea what happens if people request them for like 20 times simultaneous panels. I have no clue.
Right.
Yeah.
And Jack, yeah, kind of back to our topic of like specific examples, because you know Eddie gave some wonderful video game examples. There are little design things in tabletop that help with kind of dexterity issues because you know I don't have the best hands because of my injury. But one of the examples that pops out in my head is if you've played a game called Guild Ball, which is kind of like a Warhammer table miniatures game.
Yeah.
They have a companion app, which is a godsend because the little character cards, you have to flip them over and look at the stats and flip them over. And that much flipping and rolling dice and flipping and rolling dice is actually not easy for me because cards are so, you know, thin and against the table. But the companion app, I'm just tapping on my smartphone, which I can do. It's a game changer. It makes the game playable as opposed to obnoxious and annoying.
We have a die rolling app for Onyx Path that fills much the same space. Like, yeah, it's just convenient to have to carry dice around, but also it's convenient if like you have mobility issues because shaking your phone is often easier than.
Sentinels the Multiverse also has a similar companion app.
Right. So yeah, using this technology that does exist, as Eddie pointed out, to even things that are helpful for people who don't need it because of the accessibility aspects. You know, I like subtitles in video games as much as the next person, and I don't have a hearing problem, but are still better for people who do have accessibility issues. You know, a companion app is fun for anyone who might be playing the game and just wants to use their phone instead of all these physical things. And yet, for me, it can literally be the difference between being able to play a game and not able to play a game.
That's also an accessibility issue when it comes to like financially. Like, sometimes the app is a lot cheaper than buying all the components.
Right.
Yep. Well, but
That's
still,
one of the reasons.
No, go ahead, Cynthia. I'm sorry.
That's one of the reasons I was very insistent for Urban Manhunt to have the stand-up figures, because a lot of people can't paint the miniatures. You know, they have hand issues. I have lack of control, and so especially this hand, I can't that's like the closest thing I can come to making a fist. I can't. And I do paint, but it's hard for me. So I wanted that to be a very big factor. So we have the little crim card or for the crim stand-ups because you have to have a lot of crims in the game to go hunt. And so I thought that was pretty important to include for people that don't have complete hand issues.
And
Scalability, yeah.
I know I've talked to marketing people at video game companies about, which applies across the board to all game designers. I give the analogies, like if you look at those, if you remember late night kind of television shows where they advertise things like the clapper or the mechanical arms, whatnot.
Yes.
A lot of people will see those and go, "Wow, that's for people who are really lazy." And it's like it's because they can't say this is for disabled people. They have to make it look like it's convenient for everybody.
Right.
Right.
And that's code for, but we're primarily making this for disabled people. And you can apply the same techniques to your own games. If for some reason you're worried about accessibility being a bugaboo and tanking your game sales, first of all, you're dumb. But if you do have concern about that, you can just say, this is an additional feature. And this is a cool thing. So having these companion apps, like Stanford said, it's like, a lot of people go, this is really cool. And they're not even thinking about that. But it also allows disabled people to access things.
Yeah.
It's frustrating because it's another step towards disability erasure. And it's something that's very frustrating on that end. But I recognize that if you're trying to sell a product, sometimes you have to kind of position things in a certain way. Sometimes that is a huge feature, like with Dystopia Rising, it was absolutely on its sleeve. I was like, this is going to be a game about disability. It's going to be front and center, learn to cope. Whereas Pirates of Pugmire, pirates have peg legs and hook hands, but it's a very small piece of it because I didn't want to make it a big deal. It's like pirates are just cool, and regardless of whether they have a disability or not. And so there's a small sidebar about it, and we move on because that wasn't the place to have that conversation, but this other game is. So like you can be more targeted and say, this is a game we're going to be extremely and aggressively inclusive. And in other games, we're like, just pitch them as features. And able-bodied people can really take advantage of that.
Yeah, I have a good friend.
I was just saying, Mariah, a really good point about that is frustration is that this does position chronically ill people and other visible disabilities as lazy because they have to use these kinds of devices. So it can be a catch-22.
I have a very good friend with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome who is constantly highlighting that stuff on their Facebook page. So constantly post like, oh, look at this person making fun of this device. Like who would ever need a one-handed lemon peeler? Somebody with one hand? I don't know.
Yeah, right.
Or like somebody with bad, like poor grip in one hand and they can only use one reliably. It is mostly through them that I've learned this, and then also through working with Eddie that I have really changed my perspective. Because I used to giggle at that stuff on like late night because it looked, how silly are you? You can't hold your popcorn in your thing without dropping it. And it's like, oh, well, some people have tremors, or some and like once I started thinking about it that way and looking at it and like realizing who those products were for, I've definitely like did a complete 180 on my younger self, like. How like the Snuggie is one that a lot of people like laughed at for forever, and then somebody was like, it's a blanket for it's a robe for wheelchair users, and it's a robe for people who it's not easy to get up and put on a robe. And I was like, of course it is.
It's hard to put on a blanket, frankly.
Yeah. But like it's one of those things where like we all made fun of it for so long, like, oh, that's so silly looking, that's so dumb, who'd ever want that? And now it's like, oh, that is for specific people, and also they're comfy. So
but at least things like Snuggie's a good example. It's like that became weirdly popular for a while, and so it became it's normalized. Okay, so people buy Snuggies, it's not quote unquote weird. And it gave much more access for people to actually get things that they can genuinely use. But if there's something else that able people find as goofy or weird, then that tool's not going to sell, and we're not going to get access to it anymore. One of the things that has been fascinating to me is with hearing aids specifically. Hearing aids are ridiculously expensive because of all sorts of angry ranting reasons that I won't get into because I'll take another hour of me swearing. But there are lots of people now who are doing things like build your own hearing aid or using your phone to actually amplify things in the environments. And they're pitching them as things like, here's cool spy equipment, or here's a way to kind of help you hear in a crowded room. And it's like, oh yeah, that's a thing that bothers me as a able-bodied person. And people start adapting and integrating that stuff, and then the cost goes down and the accessibility goes up. So again, this is kind of the weird back and forth balance of you kind of have to get to a certain degree able-bodied people on board so that it becomes more widespread and people who can need this accessibility can access it. But it sometimes can be really fucking frustrating. It feels like you're almost to a degree selling out of it.
Which is why allyship, though, isn't just for the LGBTQ community. Like,
Right.
like you should be if you are a person of privilege, you should be an ally to any marginalized folks for any reason. And ally is it's a verb, not a noun. Like it's what you do, it's how you act, it's the little things. It's something that I think if you're like me and you have anxiety and you're trying really hard, you're always going to be worried you're not doing enough, but that's okay. It is okay to realize you screwed up and try to get better and be constantly improving on that stuff. Like that. I mean, like I said, I was laughing at Snuggies 10 years ago. And now I'm like, oh, these things are not for me, and that's fine. But I understand why they're marketing them this way, because otherwise they couldn't market them at all.
Yeah. And I would say a big part of this, because I also Mariah has her hand up here, just real brief before I call on her, and then there's a question or two in the chat. You know, a big part of this is, you know, again, I've seen this, and actually Cynthia, one of the conversations that we had pretty early on is just about my learning more about, you know, the transgender experience. And we were talking the one day about how I saw a post, and I was like, you know, I just always feel so nervous about asking questions, because people are like, yeah, I'm not your damn Wikipedia, like, don't ask me any freaking questions. And you were like, ask me all the questions you want, dude. Like, you know, you're not going to know if we can't have that conversation. But still, there's even like educating, there's a respectful way to ask questions.
Sure. And I'm always willing to answer questions, because the way I see it is, it's okay, it's not technically, and I've heard a lot of trans people say, oh, it's not my job to educate. Okay, maybe not. But why not do that for the community? Why not do that for others? Because if I can tell this person something and make them go, oh, then maybe that's less people that they're going to be mean to in the future, or look down upon in general. So I'm always an open book and always willing to answer questions. And, you know, I wasn't always that way to a degree. I didn't even, like, online, I never even divulged at all that I was a trans woman. I just went along, you know, let people, but the thing was, is I saw later on, as I became more mature, that, you know, it's probably important for the visibility. I was getting into the game design industry at that time, and I was like, you know, if I can be not an ambassador, that's a little lofty, but I mean, if I can be someone in the industry that people can go, hey, it's okay to be trans in the industry, or what have you, or non-binary, or what have you, then if I can be an ambassador for that, then I will.
I will say to that point, though. So yes, you know, because I'm in a wheelchair, and it is obvious that I'm like, this is not a hidden disability that I have, and you know, sometimes people do have questions, and I don't have any problem with that, but I understand that there are people in wheelchairs who do have problems with that, and I see people who are not affected by some of these disabilities who are like, well, I just had a question, why are they getting so angry? Understand that you're the 14th, 15th, 16th person that's asked the same question in the last couple of days. Yeah. It's great when people are willing to answer your questions, but they're not, you know, it's not their job, and you're not entitled to an answer from them. So
absolutely. I speak only literally for myself.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, and I think all these perspectives are important, because you don't know. So you have to consider, maybe, hey, would it be okay if I asked you a question or something of that sort? Like, not just assuming, well, I don't know, so I have to ask you. And it's like, no, just come on, man. Like, I just want to live my life. Like, you know, I just want to be me, you know?
And if someone tells you no, just take the no.
Yeah.
You know, because I don't know how it is for a lot of people. But, you know, for me, you know, someone will like, hey, can I hold something for you, or can I hold a door for you? I'm like, no, I got it, Dan. Thanks. That means no, so go away. Yep. Like, you know, I appreciate your being polite, but you don't know what I'm dealing with. You don't know what schedule I'm on. You don't know if I'm even heading in that direction. So you're now interfering with me. I had a gentleman at Wegmans a grocery store. I don't know if that's a ubiquitous enough
Hashtag
chain.
Wegmans, not a sponsor.
Sure. Who insisted on helping me up a hill that I was fine with. It was just taking me a couple extra seconds of helping me. But I had my son with me, and I literally had to yell at this gentleman, like, stop touching me, get off of me.
Wow,
And
yeah.
I could see in his face that he like thought I was just there's another angry handicapped guy. But it's like that I didn't need your help. I told you politely no the first 3 times, and then I started yelling. So like,
I don't understand how people don't understand that like pushing someone else's wheelchair unasked is the same thing as like if you were to pick me up and bodily carry me somewhere.
Yeah,
Exactly.
It's
and
the same
technically
thing.
it's assault.
Yeah,
but
right.
That's, oh my God, that's so frustrating. Yeah, I was like, the whole like asking people questions thing. That's part of why I try to be so open about my stuff, because I can talk about it, but sometimes I can't. Like sometimes I don't have the capacity. Sometimes I'm having a depressive episode and I need to sit on my couch and drink a glass of wine and cry. And that's fine. But that means that I'm probably not up for like having an in-depth conversation about how my depression affects my daily life. And it's the same thing when you talk to any marginalized folks, is like, yeah, there are tons of people out there who are in that mode, especially now with all the emotional labor everybody's done all freaking year. Of like, I'm not your Wikipedia. There's tons of it online. Just go look it up. But there are people who are like, yeah, ask me anything. And like those people ask, like, go talk to those people. But yeah, same thing as Matthew. It's like I've seen people just kind of be like, you must tell me about your trans experience, your disabled experience, or whatever, because I will never understand otherwise. And it's like, no.
That's not my job.
No.
Yeah. To me, it depends on how I'm approached. I mean, if somebody is like demanding like that, I'll be like, hey, whatever. And then there's the ones that always almost demand to find out what my dead name is. And
oh my God.
And that's something I do not. Yeah, I've had that happen. 30, 40 times at least in the last 10 years. It's ridiculous.
Also, the amount of people that care about the genitalia of trans folks is ridiculous. Like,
yes,
I know way too many people who, like, the minute they find out somebody is trans, they're like, what's their medical status? And it's like, that, you wouldn't ask me that.
Right.
Like, don't talk about strangers' genitalia?
Right, yeah.
It's a pretty easy
that
thing to not talk about.
Should be a no-brainer. It and a lot of that is
so uncomfortable.
Well, it's part of understanding this whole idea of accessibility, and there is that experience of we talked about apps briefly, and don't worry, Mariah, I did not forget about your hand. We're just having such great conversation here, but like talking about that whole things of apps, just even now during this conversation talking about that, I immediately went, oh, wait a minute. How many Fantasy Flight # not a sponsor games have I played where there's like 80 million different chits that you have to pick up off the table? So a tracking app, like we have one for like Gloomhaven, for when we play, because there's a lot going on there. Just the secondary thought of, well, we just consider it as ease of convenience, so we don't have to pick up and put down chits. We could track everything on a phone, but just the lifesaver that is, because even the simple, like, imagine how many large game table spaces some of these games take up. So, in a different situation, even just reaching across the table to quote unquote the center of that table.
Yes, impossible.
Yeah. Exactly. So. Yeah, because I've heard a lot of people, and this is probably symptomatic of what we talked about way early with like the wheelchair example in D&D, where well, why is that in I don't want your apps in my board game, classic board game, and you're like, man, every hobby grows and changes, and I think that's part of this resistance to change, where it's just play a couple of games with an app. I just got 5 Minute Mystery that has a companion app to track the 5-minute countdown. Apps can make games better, but they also increase accessibility for other folks.
And if you don't want to use it in your game, just fucking ignore it. It doesn't cost you a damn dime.
Exactly.
Move past the page with the wheel chair on it. Just move the fuck on and just don't use it.
Yeah.
So Mariah, go ahead. You've been so patient waiting with your hand there. Go ahead.
Oh no, you guys have been fantastic. Listening to all this is amazing. I am going in the way back machine, but I'm hoping that it will tie in the person who asked about what you think of games like survival of the able that focus on disabled characters as opposed to players. And my reason for bringing that up, Eddie, you were talking about in Pirates of Pugmire, how there are, and when it comes to pirates, yes, you can have someone with a peg leg and no one thinks that's a disabled pirate, but it is. So I just like the thought of like putting someone with a disability or anything in there, and it's not what Matthew always calls the spectacle. It doesn't have to be, it's just a part of it.
Yeah, so so I have strong opinions about that. But I'm for games like that. Like I've actually been looking at Survival of the Able specifically because it's the first time I've really heard of a game where the default is you play disabled characters. I'm also thinking of Harlem Unbound, where Chris Spivey at the very beginning says, unless otherwise specified, every character in here is black. So those kinds of targeted games can be fantastic for building empathy for a marginalized experience you personally share. That said, they can also fetishize them. And there's a danger there of look at how special disabled people are. And that's a big problem as well. So it does take a bit of a balancing act. And usually those games are best if they're done from the perspective of someone who shares that marginalized identity. So I believe the people making Survival of the Able are in fact disabled themselves. So like, I'm not as worried about that. But if a bunch of able-bodied people were getting together and said, we're going to game about disability, I'm super nervous about a game like that. Particularly because disability advocacy, one of the big quotes from that is nothing about us without us. And I feel very strongly about that. And this goes back to things like, this can find as tropes like the magical Negro stereotype or the pixie queer person stereotype. So you have to be careful about that. But I also feel like people need to try that and mess up a little bit and be given some room to mess up a little. I do feel like sometimes our discourse in the community can get extremely critical and can make it hard for people to want to position marginalized people in those spaces as the protagonist of those games. So
there is no nuance on Twitter.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
What you said before, it's like, you support ASL, so we're going to just be screaming at you because we misread the stretch goal. The stretch goal was not articulated perfectly, and so therefore this thing is a failure of representation. So recognizing that there can be problems with putting those kinds of characters front and center, but also recognizing that letting people make mistakes so we can do better and make better games with better representation, because otherwise we're going to get back to zero representation again, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that in the industry. Just to talk about some of the other things, because we'll definitely get to, because I actually just shared the link to Survival of the Able here in the chat, so everyone can go and check that out directly from Accessible Games. I know that a lot has been done recently with, because in addition to Harlem Unbound, also games like Air Dringor, which deals with, native and tribal situations, and Nahual, the Jiangxi, Blood in the Banquet Hall, a lot of games that, are designed from people of that culture. And a lot of, like you were kind of saying, Eddie, the one thing that I loved with Blood in the Banquet Hall, Jiangxi, is they were talking about, well, how do I role play Asian? And they're like, don't. You don't know.
Character.
Right. You just play a character, and, you don't have to do, because we've learned, hopefully, a lot, more from like our, the Charlie Chan era, and, just, actors playing roles that they should not have played. But I think that, that term fetishizing, or, playing it for a yuck, or, something like that is something that, there are wonderful podcasts. I know Asians Represent is a phenomenal podcast that, does a lot of very respectful and informative decision about, they looked at, the old, D&D Oriental Adventures stuff from years ago. And they're just like, yeah, here's where it's the problem, though. And, people getting said, how dare you take away my childhood? Book's still there. All we're saying is we can do better, folks. That's all. And maybe we're asking more, the folks from that. But, I think that having more conversations. Like, I mean, my question is, Mariah, you kind of brought it up. What is your thought, or, you know, everybody else, what's your thought regarding the game?
You mentioned a few games, so I'm not.
Oh, I'm sorry. Survival of the Able, because that was brought in as far as for the discussion. Like, I think it's an interesting. We talked a little about it. I didn't know if there was anything further she wanted to add, because I also know John had referenced it in the chat.
Yeah, I'm not personally familiar, so I can't speak to it.
Yeah.
Correct. Same here.
I have glanced at the Kickstarter page since it was mentioned, but that's about as far as I've gotten.
I heard about it about 5 minutes ago. So
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So very new to all of us. All right.
I mean, the one thing that I'm a little bit, I think I'm the most experienced with the fact I've heard of it more than this panel. But what little I looked at about it, one thing that's interesting is that it is specifically about people in the Middle Ages. And so it's not only dealing with the fact that you're disabled with no real accessibility aids, but also in a culture that largely considers you to be less of a person objectively and obviously. You know, there's no nuance there. It's like, oh, you're not a full person. And so it can really help to kind of get people to recognize not only the -2 to your dexterity roll components of disability, which is problematic in of itself, but also the social components of what it's like to be looked down on in that respect. So I am hoping a game like that would address something that it seems like it's pitched to do something like that, which I think is interesting and potentially compelling.
Yeah, I feel much the same about games that have like, I mean, I love Call of Cthulhu. I love horror games, but I don't like sanity as a track, because by definitions from 50 years ago, I'm an insane person. And that's not great, you know? So like, I like it when people can call it something else. Like you are, you know, peering into a different reality. That's terrifying. But so like, there are other things you can call it. And I like it when those things are handled sensitively. Like there are certain games like Bluebeard's Bride, for example, that I will not play with a stranger unless it's like somebody from Magpie. Because they made it. But past that, like I wouldn't play that with like a random person because I don't trust them to guide the experience. We talked about that a lot during like safety tools and consent, and partially because they don't understand the lived experience of some of this stuff. Which is I think kind of what Eddie's point was, is like if people are just trying to throw it in there for tokenism and they don't actually like have anybody consulting on it or who has the lived experience, then they are probably going to get part of it wrong. Like I wrote a disability sidebar in a project for Eddie recently that I fully expected him to have comments on, because I was like, I know Eddie's going to read this, and that's good. That is helpful for my writing.
Yep.
I would happily run it by any friends with any other disabilities to make sure that it is respectful of them as well. We run a lot of our writing by sensitivity readers and cultural consultants, like for that reason, because like I said, I am a, you know, cis straight woman. I am able-bodied, so like I haven't lived that experience. I can write about women's issues really well. And like feminism, and I can write a lot of other stuff, but I can't speak to that. So we always have people that we're running stuff by to make sure that we're not making it a fetishization or a tokenism issue or what have you.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's the one thing that's actually kept me from writing a blaxploitation game. I love the movies, and I feel it's a really good insight because black films made for black people. African Americans made these, and you know, as much as I want to. Because I love the genre, I love those movies. I really wanted to emulate that but I just don't feel comfortable. I can't emulate their experiences without knowing their experiences. Right. So that's like I would have done it years ago. Honestly.
We have a game about that 70s campy horror called The King from Beyond the Grave, and we have somebody is writing a blaxploitation scenario right now, but we did hire a black person to write it. Also, when we played the game live a while back, somebody B. Dave Walters played the most amazing like blaxploitation, like 70s talking smooth guy, and it was so great because none of the rest of us could have done it because we wouldn't have, because it would have been racist. So it was so amazing that he brought that to the table, and I'm so glad that we're getting to write a blaxploitation scenario from the perspective of a black person, because
awesome.
it's going to be so good. I'm so excited about it.
Yeah, no, both of you have hit into my personal addiction, which is emulation games. proud backer of pretty much like what 95% of the Spectrum library, as well as both they came from wherever games. You know, if you do, they came from beyond the stars. Hey, take my money. I'll throw my wallet at you right now. But I think that we've kind of uncorked another area of accessibility here in a way, which is the idea of, you know, consent and consent mechanics. We've talked pretty extensively, you know, in a lot of the professional space here, because again, I'm a mental health professional, and I also love Call of Cthulhu. I've been playing the game since 2nd edition. I've been running the game since 3rd edition. How do I phrase this? I love the fiction of H.P. Lovecraft. There, we can. Okay, that well said. But
Some of it's.
Yeah.
Yeah, Red Hook, Red Hook, and some of that I can't take. But
I love
most of it.
atmospheric horror.
Cosmic horror, atmospheric horror, totally
There we
great.
go.
The books where like black people came from a monkey, not
Not
awesome.
good. Nope. But again, I think a lot of folks in this space, whether we're talking about, and here's always kind of an interesting question I like to ask, and it's connected to accessibility. I think in a lot of ways where people are like, well, don't tell me how to play my game. And because one of the last questions we talked about were like barriers and things like that, where people are like, well, I'm going to play this, this insanity mechanic. I'm going to play it the way that I say it. And, we're even in a space where we're talking about learning. I myself, as a mental health professional, catch myself correcting myself when I'm like, oh my God, I went to this thing. It was just insane. And literally I'm sitting there and I go, oh my God, I didn't realize my mic was right there, but I'm like, oh my God, what did I just say? What did I say? And I'm like, I meant, oh, that was crazy. And then I'm like, oh, geez, I did it again. Right? And
that was wild. That was intense. That was ridiculous. Like I've been removing that from my vocabulary over the past 3 years.
And it's hard in the learning. I mean, Eddie referenced this a little, where sometimes that space of judgment while people are trying to correct themselves can be somewhat unforgiving. I mean, I hate the word cancel culture, but there are times where I go, oh, you said the bad thing, get out, you're off the island. It's like if people are trying to learn, but I've always, with Insanity Mechanic and Call of Cthulhu, I've chosen to kind of go away from points, and I've chosen to do more of a natural, well, how do you think that affects your character seeing this? Like, what do you think your character's reaction would be based on your history or whatever? Hey, table, is everybody cool with that? It's a different way of, to some degree. I mean, that I could definitely say that's not how mental health works.
Right.
You don't, I saw this and all of a sudden random roll. Oh, I'm a pyromaniac now. Okay. I guess that makes sense. What? But it also, I think that opens up the dialogue for discussing how we're even, like, let's say, your character develops anxiety. You don't know how many people, especially in our current era with everything that's going on, how that person experiences anxiety. So it's even more of, so how would you respond if someone is like, don't tell me how to play my game? If I want to play a blaxploitation character and I am white, what gives you the right to tell me I can't do that?
Nothing, but I'm not going to play with you.
Right.
Like, you can do whatever the hell you want in your own house. You can be as racist and shitty as you want, but not at my table, not. And I'm not sticking around for it. Like that's always been my kind of thing. It's like, oh, you want to play a protagonist who's a Nazi? Bye. Like, I don't need you here. It's super easy to just say no.
And I think, to Dixie's point, we as a community, we as an industry need to be more willing to say that to people.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, we have this to borrow Eddie's term, fetishizing in America of the concept, and in other parts of the world as well, but especially in America, of the fetishizing the concept of a balance to both sides of an issue that is not only kind of fallacious when it comes to actual reality, but also can be very damaging to people who are more sensitive to the things that are on one side of the issue or another.
Yeah.
Racism is a great example. If you're going to pretend to play in a game that has some sort of historical realism or whatever other kind of dog whistly bullshit you want to say. Excuse me, I don't know if we're allowed to swear on this panel.
Me and Eddie both have several times. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So
Oh, okay, good. As long as I'm
keep
not
it
the
real,
first.
Stanford. Nope, you're good.
Then we as a community and we as an industry need to say, like, whatever you're doing in your living room, fine. I cannot be there. I cannot tell you what to do. What I can say is you're not welcome at my tables. You're not welcome at my conventions. I don't need your money, so I don't want you to buy my product. You know, have at, go on Twitter, tell everyone that you think that I'm the worst person and that they should not buy my product either. Because you know what? If you convince people not to buy my products, I don't want them as customers either.
Yeah.
correct.
Right.
No,
And
we
that
have.
is something that we need to do, not only as the players of the community, but also as the developers and as the industry leader. I mean, not that I'm a leader, but like the industry leaders like WotC and other big companies.
Yeah, a couple things to that. Like one is that it's not gatekeeping if it's for the safety of everybody. Because like that's what always happens is like somebody will be like, well, you're not welcome at my table, and that person will in bad faith be like, don't gatekeep me, and it's like, I'm not gatekeeping you. You have gatekept yourself. Also, the paradox of tolerance is a thing. If anybody hasn't heard of it, look at the paradox of tolerance. It essentially says that if we're tolerant of intolerance, then we're actually not being tolerant. Like you can be intolerant of intolerance, even as a tolerant person. And so I have no trouble like kicking those people out. We have a company Discord, and people post there like looking for game posts in one of our channels, and I am very ban happy in our company Discord because I do a lot of the moderation for it. And someone the other day posted for a game where they were like, there'll be no politics or SJW bullshit. And I was like, cool. So you don't care about your players' safety. And I was like, banned, bye, get out of here. And then of course somebody else was like, popped in to have the last word and was like, and you wonder why we despise you people. And I'm like, if you despise us, you don't need to be in our Discord. Bye. And like, get out. I don't want your money or your fandom.
I was actually very proud of Games Workshop of all companies. Where here a while back they came on saying, hey, if you don't believe in equality and all this stuff, we don't want you as our customers. I was like, I did not expect that from them, if you want to be honest.
I feel like I've always phrased it as firing customers, and I've always been a huge supporter of it. Is like I specifically, it's not that I don't want your money. I specifically don't want you in my space, in my community, my customer. I have fired you out. There's a difference between, oh yeah, I guess I don't get your cash. No, explicitly get out of my space. And like Stanford said, is like if you get all of your intolerant friends to also not buy my stuff, great. That saves me a lot of trouble.
It's also the amount of like people who say they're never going to buy our stuff again, and then are like in the next Kickstarter buying our stuff.
That's the other thing.
It's like full of SJW stuff.
It's like
It's
if
so
you're going to be a
funny.
tolerant asshole, stick to your guns at least. Jeez.
Wow.
Yeah, we have a couple of folks that back every single one of our Kickstarters just to complain about how we're all like leftist tools, and it's like, okay,
Thanks for your money, but also get out.
yeah, bye.
Well, I think it goes back to an old Buddhist adage. You know, the only thing that never changes is that everything always changes, and sometimes that change can be uncomfortable for people.
Sure.
But you know, the more we resist it, the more it hurts. It's actually one of the, again, borrowing from my Buddhist leanings, it's one of the reasons we suffer, because we want something to be the way it ain't, or we don't want something to be the way it is. So, you know, part of this, I think, is, you know, you're talking about, you know, this onus of responsibility in the gaming industry to set a standard. And that standard is just that this hurts people. And if you're really, you know, if you want this to be this, well, I'm just hanging out with my friends. So who are you to tell me what kind of time I have? Well, but it's more than just about your friends and your table. You know, think about, you know, I think back on some of, because I started playing role playing with, you know, Dungeons and Dragons back when I was like 12, 13 years old, and I didn't know what the heck I was doing. And I was lucky enough to play with the older kids. And now I look back at some of those sessions and I'm like, oh my God, like what? Whoo. Boy, did I learn the wrong, you know what I mean? And even as much as I love voices and accents, I'm even trying to be more cognizant of accents that I do and voices that I do, that, you know, every mobster doesn't have to be an Italian gangster, or, you know, every wise learned sage doesn't need to sound like James Hong, you know, it's this, And it's this thing, no, just pulling it out, because you meet James Hong and he's just like, well, hello, it's very nice to meet you today. How are you doing? But he, when he portrays, he plays to the role, and it's, it, so it's fascinating and it's great. I think that we're having these conversations because think of the people coming into this hobby. This hobby has now, whether it's, the influence of Critical Role, or whether it's, the fact that we're starting to have these conversations. I remember I didn't play a role-playing session with my first female until I was in college. That's 7 years of RPG, and I RPG'd a lot when I was in high school, but I didn't play my first RPG and with a girl until college. Like, that's astounding. So now I think of just how much representation we're creating and how much inclusion, and even that word sometimes, it sounds like permission and allowance, as opposed to just it should be. It shouldn't be holy. Like, I want new gamers, and I think we're all saying this, to come into where they don't even make that recognition that I was unfortunately able to make because of my gamer experience. It was so uncommon that it was actually like, oh geez, I can't make all those other jokes that I made now because, oh my God. And that was before we were having these conversations, right?
Sure.
A lot of people still made those jokes.
Oh yes, I've seen them.
Even with women at the table.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Now, if the table all included are playing, and again, I know that there are games that are inherently problematic. If your group is okay with a game of double entendre, like a bad episode of Three's Company, where you want to make all kinds of like sexual innuendo statements.
Sure.
Again, we're not saying you can't do that, but we're just saying things like safety tools and consent and getting the agreement of the table. That's key. This is not just a tool for therapists to make sure everybody feels okay. Go ahead, Eddie.
You have 3 minutes, and Mariah has her hand up.
Oh my goodness, Mariah, go ahead. I'm so sorry. We're getting on a roll there.
She could just come in here and talk.
Yeah.
It's probably faster, honestly.
Again, no, you all of you are just so fantastic. And I'm so sorry I keep talking, but I didn't know when I would be able to say this, because I think Dixie much earlier had said about all marginalized groups, and you guys brought up race, so I'm so sorry. I'm gonna have to talk about it. I want to reiterate what she said. You cannot be supportive of a marginalized group and not be supportive of all of them. You cannot support the disabled community, the transgendered community, and the Black community, and pick another one and be like, oh nope, sorry, women, you're out. I am so sorry. That is not how that works.
Wait, no, I draw the line at women.
It just, and of course, with 2020 and how things are going, and I am personally, yes, I have a husband with a disability. I'm a physical therapist, so I work with the disabled community. That is my job, or was my job. But now with talking about Black Lives Matter and transgendered lives matter and women's rights, I'm like, everything that you people just said, you could take those words and insert Black. You could take those words and insert female.
Sure.
You could take those words and insert transgender. Now, being Black is not a disability, but they sure are treated that way. Being transgendered is not a disability, but you sure are treated that way. It's about treating everybody equally, the same, including them. And also, I just wanted to say, because it comes up in my head regarding asking people questions, and you know what, if someone in a wheelchair tells you to get the fuck off of them, go away. I'm so sorry that you had a bad experience with that person in a wheelchair. If someone who is transgendered and you use the wrong pronoun and they yell at you, they have every right to yell at you. I'm sorry. You can go away and continue with your life without strife. You have lived your whole life without being treated worse than, you're being misconstrued, being misgendered, being treated less than a person. You can deal with that day where someone yelled at you. Go away. And I commend people, Cynthia, who are willing to talk to other people.
Thank you.
And teach. But like Matthew said, everyone doesn't have to. So
Exactly. No, and I hope I didn't come off where I was making.
oh
it sound like
gosh,
it was,
no, Cynthia,
you
not at
know,
all.
an obligation. It's just for me. That's how I felt. That it was a way,
Absolutely.
you know.
And I do think that once people come to a certain level of maturity, they're going to talk about it. Because this panel right here is happening right now where people are coming together and we're all going to talk about our disabilities and how you can make it better for me and the struggles that I've had. And I say it's not me, it's all of you. This is huge. This is important. But not everyone has to come here. But at least people can come here and listen and hear. Like, oh, look, these people have experienced things just like me and they feel the same way. You know, we need more of that. So thank you.
Thank you. And I mean, that's even before we get into intersectionality, when we talk about, like, you know, Black trans folks or disabled trans folks or any of the various, you know, combinations you can have. Because I've been donating to a lot of Black trans charities this summer because that's been where I think that my money's doing the best. Because they are, like, trebly marginalized. Black trans women are killed at a rate higher than pretty much anybody else.
I was getting ready to mention that.
So like, we are all, I do believe we are all white folks. You know, we each have our things, but you really have to look at it through other lenses too, and at least be aware of those intersections.
And be willing to accept that, you know, empathy is not innate. I think that's one of the biggest. Empathy and compassion are choices, not natural functions. We can learn to have empathy and we can practice empathy and compassion, but a lot of times it is about learning to think outside of just stopping just for a moment and asking that question of what if or what else, you know, what not me, you know, as to what another person's experience is, and just consider how something that you say or something you do might impact that person. And you don't have to know, you know, it mindfulness, again, borrowing on my Buddhist thing before we kind of close out with where folks can find everybody, is, you know, people regard mindful and being mindful as, oh, I got to remember that. You know, it's not a grocery list, folks. Mindfulness is a word that is, I'm going to think about the impact of my statements, my thoughts, and my actions. Even if I don't vocalize it, what does that thought in my head say about me and my experience and my perception? So it's about taking the time, because it's worth the time, to think about why we think what we think, and can we do different? Can we do better? And the question always is yes. And it's just about considering all of those options. So with the permission of the panel, were there any final thoughts before I did the infamous, where can everybody find you? And that kind of a thing. Were there any other final thoughts from the panel?
I just want to say that one thing I've learned is that if you do misgender somebody, or you do say, like, put your foot in your mouth when you're talking to someone, it's best to just correct yourself and move on. We talked about that a little bit in yesterday's consent panel, if anybody missed that, about the, like, ring theory. Because if I misgender one of my trans friends or non-binary friends especially, and then I sit there and fall over myself apologizing and I need their forgiveness, and oh my God, I'm such a bad person and now I need you to reassure me, I have actually made the situation much, much worse. If I misgender somebody and I say, oh, I'm so sorry, correct yourself, move on, then I can go to my boyfriend or somebody and be like, I feel like such an asshole. Oh my God, that was, I'm so embarrassed. But don't put that on the person you wronged. Like, never put, if I stumble and make say a turn of phrase in front of Eddie that is actually insensitive to people with hearing loss, and then I go, oh crap, I shouldn't have said that. But, like, correct yourself, move on. And you know, don't sit in it, and don't make that person do the labor of reassuring you.
And also, slightly related to that also is that marginalized people can make fun of their own identity, but you cannot join in. I will often make jokes about my hearing loss, and then sometimes I find people are like joining in and saying, no, that's not how this works. You can step back. I get to make the funnies. Move on.
So any other final thoughts? Well, I got, hey,
turn your auto tune off.
Yeah, I was like, oh, that happened. So if there are no other final thoughts, Stanford, why don't you start out? Where can people find you?
We are we are mostly a storefront, so we are at legendarypants.com. You can find us on Twitter at legendary_pants. We're also on Facebook. Just type in Legendary Pants into Google, you'll find all of our stuff. And we sell dice mostly, so come buy our dice.
Magical dice.
I bought your dice last year. They're really good.
I did too. I bought.
I'm glad. I'm glad they're working out for everybody. We have a
they're
new,
in use.
we have a new campaign coming up fairly soon. Yeah, mine's been sleeping on the couch behind me. But I don't have a firm date on that, so I can't give an announcement on that. But yep, that's us.
All right, thank you, Eddie. Where can people find you, and what do you have coming up?
Well, aside from staring at Wednesday's butt there,
Cat butt.
It was just her tail. It wasn't like she, tried to start an OnlyFans or anything.
If you like this kind of off-track shenanigans that me and Dixie are going through, you can check us out at the Onyx Pathcast through most of your podcatchers. But aside from that, you can find me at pugsteady.com, and from there, access to my social media accounts and my contact page. And if you want to learn more about my special game that you see back here of dogs in fantasy worlds, check out realmsofpugmire.com.
Absolutely, which includes not only Pugmire, Monarchies of Mao, the upcoming Pirates of Pugmire, and the family-friendly cooperative deck-building experience, Fetch Quest.
Best name ever for a game.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. It's a beautiful game as well.
Definitely Rose Bailey's best contribution.
Right. Yes, I am a citizen of the realms of Pugmire, I must say. Cynthia, where can the folks find you?
You find me at spectrum-games.com. The dash is important. Trust me on this. And I'm all over social media, all platforms. And that's pretty much it.
And
I'm simple. See, look at that.
I was just saying, so what's the big stuff that y'all are working on? Because I know you have a hugely popular minis game, as well as tons of other stuff. So I just want to make sure you get that out there to the peoples.
Urban Manhunt has taken off in ways that I wouldn't have imagined, including a movie going to be made about it, which still blows my mind. It's nuts.
Wow, congratulations.
Thank you. So we're working on the campaign rules, which is still in playtest, and that's going to be a bit still in playtest. There's a lot of moving parts, but the one that's going to be coming out for it here really soon, quote unquote, really soon, is the companion, which is one of those supplements that has just a lot of little things that it's like the old Star Wars source book, or Colmil Full, I think it's how it's pronounced, for Castle Falkenstein. And so it's got a little bit of everything in there. And in addition, we are doing Biff Bam Kapow, which emulates the 1960s era superhero TV shows.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you. And Dixie, where can the folks find you?
I'm at Dixie Cyanide on most social media.
Look at that.
You can also
most prepared.
I just honestly, my friend Meredith did my Twitch graphics, and they're beautiful, so I just use them for my background all the time, and they have my name on there. But you can find me at Dixie Cyanide on most social media. You can find my website at dixiecochran.com. That's most of where I am. I'm yelling about politics on Twitter. Every now and then.
About politics everywhere.
I'm yelling about politics on the Onyx Pathcast on some level, although we try to keep it to a minimum because of it being a company podcast. It's not really my platform for that. But as far as like everywhere else, like if you find me in a Discord, I'm probably yelling about politics. This is just 2020.
Well, I want to again zing out a huge thank you to all of you for being a part of the panel. Such wonderful sharing and insight. Thank you also to everyone out there in the audience for being a part of this. All of the Bodhana hosted panels this weekend, and hopefully a wealth of the ones that are hosted by some of our other partners, as well as therapists. I know there was a What's Up with Onyx Path panel that was done. So we're either going to get you the direct video that'll be on our YouTube channel, or we'll have links to all this wonderful content over the weekend. So from Bodhana, on behalf of us and Save Against Fear, thank you, everybody. And please enjoy the rest of the con and be safe and well.
Thank you for moderating.
Oh, thank you all for being here. Oh, go on.
See, Jack, you are good at this.
Thank you. Great show.
Oh, thank you. Who knew Jack loved to talk, right? And